Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined this week by a man who we can now officially describe as the best football writer in the country, following his recent investiture as SGA Football Journalist of the Year. Congratulations and welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Jonathan Northcroft.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, I'm pleased. I've got an actual trophy, not a Mikel Arteta trophy. So, hooray!
The big question is: does winning that actual trophy make up for supporting Aberdeen?
Well, we're about to win a trophy and shock the world against Celtic, and I've got my fingers crossed as I say that. No, you don't support Aberdeen for the glory. I mean, you used to, but I mean, that's
I was going to say
ago.
anymore.
Not anymore. No. I think it's a long road. It's a long road. It has its rewards.
Well, we hope it goes well in that cup final, and we can get organising a joint open top bus parade around Aberdeen.
Muckles will do, Duncan. Muckles will do.
We're going to talk about Jose Mourinho's past, present and future, the state of the Premier League's leading clubs as they approach the summer transfer window today. But let's start by answering a question that multiple listeners have been posing to me on social media about Luís Campos, the man who built the Paris Saint-Germain side that has defeated one English side after another en route to this season's Champions League final. Including, if we're to believe Mikel Arteta, the best one in the competition, with their 3-1 aggregate win over Arsenal concluded on Wednesday night. Campos, as we had told you on this podcast, is in a strange situation given what he's done with PSG. Completely overhauled the squad, won the title all 3 seasons he's been there, moved on individuals like Lionel Messi, Neymar for a fee of 90 million euros, which I think deserves a trophy in itself, and dealt with the exit of Kylian Mbappe, replaced them with for me what I think is the most exciting and most interesting attack in the European game, totally fluid, interchangeable forward line, which is centred, something we wouldn't have expected either with Ousmane Dembele, Quisha Kvaratskhelia, Desiree Doué, Bradley Barcola, all his signings. So no question of what he's achieved, reduced the wage bill while doing all of that. I think they've been at points the youngest team in the Champions League this season. Average age of the lineup they put out against Arsenal was 24.2 years. So they've got years and years ahead of them. And into that Champions League final for only the second time in the club's history. There has been discussions this season over extending his contract, which concludes at the end of this year. Those discussions had not gone well, quite a separation on the terms. I can tell you that there was another meeting between Campos and Qatar Sports Investment, the owners of Paris Saint-Germain, last week, and they again failed to agree the terms of a new contract during that discussion. So as it stands, a guy with this reputation of building Champions League finalists and building 2 French title-winning teams, Monaco and Lille, before that, is going to be available in the summer. We told you that he's wanted by the Saudi Arabian government to head up a project aimed at building a team that can I guess, not embarrass the nation when they have the World Cup in Saudi Arabia. He has been in discussions, ironically, with Arsenal before they appointed Andrea Berta. He was Mikel Arteta's recommended appointment to replace Edu as sports director. There have been conversations with Chelsea, but as it stands, the only live discussions with Paris Saint-Germain and no resolution in that. And I think a question mark over it, my guidance is that Campos is ready to step away and take a break if he doesn't receive the offer he feels he merits for his work at Paris, and feels that he is valued. And interestingly, and this is one of the things that prompted questions this week, Campos met Alex Ferguson in a Paris hotel ahead of the Champions League semi-final, with discussions on social media that he was perhaps being lined up by United to come in and replace their cadre of sports directors. My guidance is that it had nothing to do with working at Manchester United. Ferguson, of course, has been sacked by Jim Ratcliffe this season, is no longer an employee. Apparently the discussion was a general conversation about football, no talks about Campos moving to Manchester United. Johnny, what's your sense of what Campos has done with this Paris Saint-Germain side, and whether there might be a job for him in the Premier League in the future?
Well, I think it's nothing short of a masterpiece what he's done at PSG, and he's not the most high-profile sporting director for whatever reason. I think he's a bit like Monchi in that he lets his work speak for himself. He's not a big. I know you've interviewed him before, but very few have. He gets his head down and does his work, and it's an incredible change. We've all been marvelling at it this season, but actually it's a process that's been underway for a few years since he arrived, really, at PSG. This evolution from being an absolute FC Hollywood of a team to being a properly constructed, beautifully constructed, sort of not just 11, but sort of squad of players drawn from different places. I mean, Campos has clearly used his great knowledge of the Portuguese game to pluck real gems in Vitinha and João Neves. But you also look at the quality of the French signings, and that's something that has been staring PSG in the face for years before he arrived. The quality of young French talent, especially talent born and bred in the Parisian area, but for whatever reason had historically been allowed to leave Paris and go to other French clubs. Sort of collecting the right ones. Doué has been sensational. Barcola. And Dembele, which again is a really, that's the kind of deal that you do as a sporting director, I think, and you risk your reputation, because Dembele was, I wouldn't say discredited, but he'd fallen from grace.
Very close to that. Very close to that.
Very close, wasn't it? Yeah, and he'd fallen from the point of, I think Barcelona bought him for 110 million and PSG got him for about 45 million. So that tells you, at the age of 23 or 24, so that tells you something about where he was in his career. I mean, Kvaratskhelia is just a sensational piece of business for the same price as Arsenal spent on, Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Jesus, and still didn't get a good left-sided player, if you know what I mean. So that's an amazing signing. William Pacho, in a market where quality left-sided centre-backs who can be comfortable with the ball at their feet, that's another great signing. And then you referenced it, Duncan, that the sales have been really important. That's an overlooked part of every sort of club's recruitment operation. But to be able to realise 50 million euros for Manuel Ugarte and 50 million for Xavi Simons and offload Kolo Muani, who hadn't worked, get him away on loan. And then that's before you get to somehow getting a combined 150 million almost for Verratti and Neymar. I mean, it's been a real tour de force, and I would be very surprised if he's not in huge demand. Should he not be able to, or not want to renew the contract at PSG, because recruitment's never been more important. And this guy is on the brink of building a Champions League team, but also rebuilding, completely re-engineering a football club.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to emphasise, because he appointed the coach, Luis Enrique, worked very closely together. A lot of work gone into the background at the training ground, in the way he handles and deals with players, and the way that he works on communication with younger players. Because if you're going to focus on youth in the way that they have to build this team, then you've got to make sure you get that youth invested and performing as quickly as possible, which has been another one of the achievements of this squad, and also I think the squads he built at Lille and Monaco. And yeah, you're right, moving players out and being able to take those big risks on people like Dembele, you mentioned Kolo Muani, loaning Kolo Muani in the January window, after he'd been signed for vast sum of money the previous summer at Enrique's request. Again, that's a kind of move that can embarrass you, but it doesn't embarrass you when the attack gets rebuilt around it, and you take an unsettled individual out of the dressing room and you go on to the Champions League final playing. I think for me, it's the most interesting, entertaining football, the way Enrique's got the side set up. Without a proper centre forward, but with such a fluidity. Usually they dominate possession, but I think in the Arsenal game we saw that they can destroy you in the counter attack as well. They're just a very, very good football side, and to be at this stage of one game away from winning the Champions League, essentially 2 years into the proper development of it, because that was when he was really allowed to shift out the older players, is yeah, I don't think anyone is doing that kind of work at this level in European football.
No, they're a very intelligent football team, and you can see that against Arsenal in the second leg, where they're bombarded with the long throws and the crosses into the box, and fair play to Mikel Arteta there. He came up with something that was different to what PSG would normally face, and did take them out of their comfort zone. But across the game, in fact, by midway through the first half, they'd worked out how to deal with those things. They changed their marking a little bit, and they were repelling those situations. And that typifies what they've been like throughout the season. This has been a team that was 15th in the Champions League stage, and has grown into the competition. So what you see is, I agree, the football's a delight. For me, it's a bit of a fusion between the sort of philosophy that's underpinned the most successful football of the modern era, which is positional football, a la Pep Guardiola, etc., but then with an evolution to it, with freedoms being given to some of the players at the top of the pitch to allow them to use their talent, with an ability to mix it up and counter-attack when you need to, and with us, just a chemistry between the three in midfield, who are all, I think they're all unclassifiable. Actually, those three midfielders, you couldn't really say, oh, he's a 6, he's an 8, he's a 10. I mean, they can all do a bit of everything. Vitinha, who's supposed to be the holding player, I mean, the dribble he had against him was incredible. And then you've got the chemistry of the players up front. You've got a situation where you've got the fullback, Hakimi, being the player who had the most touches on the pitch, and his heat map was pretty mad. So within the sort of structure that Enrique coaches, he also allows freedoms, and I think that's where football's going. I think the best teams now are taking the positional style, but adding to it, flexing it, and there's no greater example at the moment than PSG.
The Transfers podcast is running an audience survey at the moment. If you have a few minutes to fill it in, please do, and give us your thoughts on the show and guide us in ways in which we can improve it and bring you better content going forward. The link is in the show notes and also on our social media platforms. Talking about the evolution of football there, I think that takes us neatly on to article you wrote for the Sunday Times last weekend. Headlined "The Decline of Jose Mourinho how special one became ordinary. And I know I'm putting you on the seat of the sub-editor who gave the headline to a piece.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't write the headlines, to use the old journalistic line. But go on.
What it was highlighting was that it was 20 years since Jose Mourinho won his first Premier League title, 10 years since he won his last. And then you talked about the split in the performance of his career. I mean, there's a whole load of aspects I want to go into here. But tell us first about the kind of the raw data of trophy winning in the first half of his career, from that first role at Benfica in 2000 up until the second half and his current position at Fenerbahce.
Yeah. I mean, and going back over Jose's story made me realise afresh what an incredible career it's been, and what a kind of comet from the heavens he was when he scorched into the football firmament, starting with Leiria, and then very, very quickly just laying waste to European football. So I think it was 22 trophies in his first decade as a manager, or as a top flight manager. I think I've kind of now forgotten exactly the stat.
And it was by the end of 2014-15, Mourinho had won 22 trophies in 12 full seasons as a manager.
Yeah, that's right.
The 10 years since have brought 3 trophies. In the first period, across 749 matches, Mourinho lost only 1 game in 8 on average. And then in the 445 matches since, he's lost about 1 in 4 on average.
Yeah. So if you take the sort of post, let's say post 2017 career, it's still been a career that's been, in some terms quite successful, winning Roma's first trophy. In fact, any first Italian club to win a European trophy, I think, in 12 years. You wind back to Manchester United, and he brought 2 trophies and had the most successful season since Alex Ferguson. So if that was your starting point, you'd be looking at an okay coaching career, reasonably successful coaching career. But because of what happened before, because of those 12 years of unfettered success, and actually I think in his first 4 completed seasons as a manager, it was 4 league titles, and it was both of the top European trophies and domestic cups as well. I think the first coach to win both the league, well, basically all the available trophies in a domestic arena in 4 different countries. So that means league title, major domestic cup, Super Cup in England, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. I mean, these are just unprecedented sort of measures of success, and I think the fascination with Jose Mourinho, and it was kind of backed up by the amount of people who read it and commented on it, that he may be, I sort of said this in the piece, he may be kind of slightly off stage now in terms of the main European leagues. He's at a very big club in Turkey, but the Turkish league is we would say second tier in terms of European leagues. He might still be off at the main stage, but I think his presence is still there, partly because of what he achieved, and partly because of the influence he's had. And we mentioned, we talked about Luís Campos, who was not just a friend of Jose Mourinho's, but somebody who Mourinho sort of believed in and helped grow his career, bringing him into the Real Madrid recruitment department. And then that's before you look at the amount of Portuguese managers. There's twice as many Portuguese managers in the Premier League as there are English ones. The sons of Mourinho everywhere. And he still holds this magnetism because of what he has done.
I think you mentioned the records that they still hold, that Chelsea team still hold in terms of goals conceded, not losing home games for years on end.
9 years without losing a home game
in the league. And then for me, one of the biggest ones has always been the season in Real Madrid, where he achieved what he was brought in to do, which was end the dominance of Barcelona, the kill Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team, and Guardiola quit the job at the end of that season, 2011-12, and it's known as La Liga de los Records in Spain because that Madrid team finished with 100 points. Breaking Barcelona's record, still the record for the most points in a Spanish league season. They'd won the league at the beginning of May, they deliberately targeted the record and kept themselves going till the end to get there. And then 121 goals scored in that season, breaking Madrid's own record of 107. So you have all this stuff. And it's a kind of the internal criticism of Mourinho as the arch defensive coach. And then probably his greatest work was in terms of games won and goals scored, the best attacking team La Liga have seen statistically. You go through a lot of elements. You can tell it's a very well-researched piece. You go through a lot of elements kind of trying to analyse why there has been that drop-off in his performance, and it's clearly not one thing. One element you point out is the change in his support staff, and the fact that nobody he works with now was part of that original group that he had from Laria onwards. You point out the quality of assistants he had at Chelsea, Rui Faria being the principal one, the man who came up with the fitness and the tactical preparation program that the two of them developed together and implemented together. Then you have Andre Villas-Boas, who went on to be a European trophy winning manager in his own right. He's currently president of Porto. Steve Clarke was an inherited assistant who went on to win trophies as Liverpool, as essentially the training ground coach to Kenny Dalglish. Brendan Rodgers in the background in the academy learning under Mourinho and where he's gone on to his career. How much would you say that change in support staff, and also I think in coaching methodology, day-to-day coaching methodology, has contributed to the two halves of Mourinho's career?
I think it's highly significant. I think it's very significant, in fact, that there is a clear before and after in his career, I think. And the line there would be 2018. And that's the point at which Rui Faria, who had been with him since 2001, since Leiria, since Rui came out of university with this idea around tactical periodization. He'd studied under the so-called father of the method, Vitor Frade, but Frade had never coached or even written this method down on paper. It was an idea, which was to blend tactical work with fitness work. Which is something, when I say it now, it just sounds so obvious. And it's obvious because it's become widespread in football. It's become popularized because of the success that Mourinho and Faria had with it. But Faria joined him in 2001, and together they developed this into an actual training framework, a proper methodology. And if you think about those great Mourinho teams, incredibly tactically flexible and aware and disciplined and clever, and also incredibly fit. And that was a product of day-to-day work on the training pitch, where, as I say, tactics and fitness work are being blended all the time. And Rui was with them in the Chelsea phase. He sort of rose through the coaching staff ranks, really, to become his main assistant. You probably have a better idea about the exact point that happened. It's unclear because Rui's job titles kept changing, but would it have been by the time he was at Inter, Duncan? Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. By the time he was at Inter, he was the principal assistant. Yeah,
and he assists him at Inter
from a titular perspective, and then involved in all of the aspects of managing.
Yeah. And he's with them throughout until Manchester United, and completed the first 2 years at United with them. Won the Europa League and League Cup, then finished second. And at the end of the 2017-18 season, Rui left the staff to go back to London to spend more time with his family because he'd been living away in Manchester and living away for so long. And I think there's a clear before and after, because after that point, Mourinho moved towards more Italian-based sort of fitness coaches, fitness methods. And I think there's been a clear drop-off in player availability and perhaps the physical edge to his teams since then. But there's another important function, two important functions actually as well. I think was lost when Freya left. One, Freya was always an interface between Mourinho and the players because he did the day-to-day work and players liked his training and his personality. He had good relationships with so many players. And as someone put it to me, him and Jose were good cop and bad cop, and the good cop left. And that was a problem, particularly Manchester United, where you can see the problems starting to happen with people like Pogba in earnest after 2018. And then I think the other thing is Rui was able to challenge Jose as a not as an equal, but as a long time sort of confidant and somebody between them. From what I understand, there's still enormous respect. So we're not talking about a rift here. We're talking about a life decision. But he had someone he respected, who he saw as almost an equal, and he could challenge him, and in the way that every leader needs to be challenged. So I think there's been a clear change, and what you see now is he has a younger staff. His two of his assistants are sort of Italians in their mid-30s. And then he's got the old hand in Formicino, who is maybe an old sort of consigliere type. But there's a drop when you can just compare what that looks like to that incredible staff at Chelsea, where you had 4 or 5 guys who in their own right then became managers. It's a change, and it's kind of happened by accident, perhaps, but it's something that I believe has had a big impact on his work.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct to highlight player availability, and there's some, if people want to dig into, you can see the statistics of player availability at Manchester United when that change happened. When there was the switch from Faria's methodology to the Italian methodology, of a coach called Stefano Rapetti came in and took over the fitness element and the preparation of players, and a big part of the way Faria works is to manage load, not using GPS tools, but using a kind of holistic assessment of where the player is and what they've been doing, an emotional state, to avoid them getting injured, and those numbers are evident.
And by the way, if I mentioned Jose's enduring influence. If you look at the Premier League this year, Liverpool, excellent player availability, tactical periodisation. Ruben Peters, the coach that Arne Slot brought with him from Feyenoord, has implemented that. And the best in the league, Nottingham Forest, Mourinho's old player, Nuno Espirito Santo, who's got a long history of excellent player availability. So the influence is there. The people that are still doing this are benefiting from it.
One thing you also highlighted in the piece, which I think is really interesting, Mourinho's a kind of an example of maybe a trait or a career pattern that goes hidden for some of us. It is his selection of jobs. I think including Manchester United, but particularly post-Manchester United, the rush to take another job in England at Tottenham Hotspur. There were circumstances in terms of COVID coming in that led to Daniel Levy breaking his promise to give Mourinho money to turn the team into title winners. Then sacked by Tottenham on the 19th of April, and within 2 weeks choosing to go to Roma. And by doing so missing out on an opportunity to go back to Real Madrid. And then perhaps I think we could add Fenerbahce into this, in that he was then looking for a club which had support and an internal status within the country, which made him feel special, for want of another word. Talk us through where you think Mourinho has gone wrong in those job choices, and how perhaps those job choices have led to him shifting himself further away from the opportunity to win trophies as he did in the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, just as a player has to be clever about how they plot a career and take the right steps with the right clubs, it's the same for coaches. And I always remember something that Mourinho's old nemesis Rafa Benitez said once when he was chatting off the record at the end of a press briefing, and I was with a group of Sunday journalists, and we were sort of we were bigging Rafa up. I can't remember what point of what he'd done, but we were sort of telling him how well he was doing, and I remember him just saying, "You know what? The best coach in the country might be in League Two. You guys don't know. Don't." And his point was that you can look good at a top club because you're winning, but it doesn't always make you the best coach. And there might be somebody doing brilliant work outside of that firmament, but success is relative to the team. And I do think that's a factor with Jose. And I think that something that came back to me when I was talking to people to get the piece sort of right was impatience. The word impatience was used a lot. And actually, you can think of Mourinho as a man of action, and impatience is partly being decisive, wanting to not wait but do something. That's what's made him such a brilliant user of substitutes, for example. Almost invented the halftime substitution in England, right? But as a trait, that hasn't necessarily helped him plot a career path, I don't think. And after Real Madrid, he had the sort of emotional return to Chelsea, and built another incredible team, won the title in 2015, and the career was kind of almost you can take different high points, but in some ways, having come full circle, he had the world in the palm of his hand. And I interviewed him round about that time, and he was talking about creating a dynasty there, a team that would last 10 years, what he needed to do to build further than what he'd done. And it went wrong very quickly. Club didn't back him with signings. There was the Eva Canario debacle, and he left Chelsea in a rush and emotionally in the December of that year. And I think since then, we've seen a series of emotional choices, of rushed choices, maybe. He became Manchester United manager very quickly after that. 4 or 5 months was the break time. And yes, Manchester United, and yes, he's got an enduring friendship with Alex Ferguson, and there are many reasons for him to do it. But, Man United, particularly then, with Ed Woodward there and all the issues, was not what it said on the tin. And he found himself up against Pep Guardiola's Manchester City at their peak, plus a rising Klopp's Liverpool. A very difficult time to take over and to look successful. And then when United went wrong, he was quick to want to prove himself in English football again, and took the Tottenham job. And again, he's far from the first manager to walk into Tottenham believing it's time to move this club to the next level, and finding the backing isn't quite there. And then from there, you mentioned it, Duncan, that he took the Roma job on the rebound from Spurs, when he had people in the circle advising him, just wait. And 10 days after taking the Roma job, Real Madrid call asking if he'll come back, and it's too late. And Carlo Ancelotti gets a gig, and the rest is history for Carlo. And then Fenerbahce, again, it's a slightly romantic, emotional choice. Great club. Incredible passion in the support, but a club that hasn't won the title for 12 years and who are now in the shadow to an extent of their hated rivals, Galatasaray, and yet a club where the expectation is still first or nothing. So I think a club that's changed managers at a rate of more than one a year for a decade. So not a sort of logical, strategic career choice, more an emotional one. And I do think that's been an issue for him. And when you think about some of the tools that have made him a great manager, in-game changes, being able to use a big squad really cleverly with substitutions and different shapes and tactics for different games, that becomes harder when your squad is second, third or fourth tier in terms of the league that it's in. It takes away one of his superpowers. And I think that's another reason why he's found it harder to make the impact that he used to make, because he said it himself, that the better the players you have, the better the coach you are. And I do think that's part of his story in the last 10 years as well.
You're talking about superpowers and his ability to analyse opponents, which I think was unprecedented when he came into English football. It was kind of one of the elements where he did the Arsene Wenger-like thing and brought something new into the English game that gave him a massive competitive advantage over the competition. But he has this ability to analyse opponents, work out the way where their weaknesses are, devise a plan to take advantage of those weaknesses, get his players to implement it. But if you have that skill in an era where teams are playing more positional football, playing more attacking football, does it then become inevitable that you end up playing more on the counter, playing more defensively, and kind of falling into the damage that being accused of being a defensive coach has in the modern game, and again results in you getting less job opportunities?
I think so. He's never been a dogmatic, a philosophy-based coach, and you referenced the incredible attacking output at Real Madrid. So this guy that's been characterised as a defensive coach, actually, he's always tailored his approach to what he's got at his disposal and who the opposition are. Pragmatism.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, a real ability to, in a detailed way, unpick and analyse an opposition. And when he arrived at Chelsea, in fact, before then, he was using. I remember a story about before Porto played Monaco in the Champions League final in 2004. Villas-Boas, who was his analyst at the time, produced, a kind of a physical video of Jerome Roten and gave it to Paulo Ferreira. And for 3 weeks, Ferreira was studying this video and working on training on how he was going to stop Roten. That's so quaint now because every club has got video analysis. Every club's got high-level departments doing this stuff. So that pioneering edge is gone. And then, as you say, in terms of style, when you're in a world where positional football reigns and everybody wants to have five across the front line and attack in numbers, and we've seen the Champions League semi-finals are an illustration of where modern football is. Always try and go forward and outscore the opposition rather than sit back. If you're the guy that is the sort of your trade is being the antithesis of what your opponents are and being difficult for them to play against, it is inevitable that your strategies are then going to end up being counter-attacking strategies, containing strategies, and I think that's what's led that. Coupled with the fact he's been at underdog clubs, is what has led him down a road of essentially trying to create counter-attacking triumphs in the image of that great Inter Milan Barcelona triumph. So he can certainly do it. He can certainly win without the ball, but he's gone down that. I'm not sure I want to call it rabbit hole, but in the modern game, tastes are such that people think it's a rabbit hole of counter-attacking football. And, in doing this piece, it made me think, what would he be like with a top squad at a top team again? What would the football look like? And that would be the litmus test. If he was still playing counter-attack football at that point, okay, he's then gone hook, line and sinker into that world. But I do think it's largely because he's trying to win with underdog teams against, as you say, those positional attacking sides.
So we might get to see outside the club domain what the answer will be to that question, whether he has fundamentally changed or whether he's now dogmatically going to use counter-attacking football, whatever quality of players he has. Because understanding I have is that the new president of the Portuguese Federation, Pedro Proença, is ready to dispense with Roberto Martinez and has been preparing the ground to replace him as coach, and that Martinez is likely to go if he doesn't win UEFA Nations League with Portugal next month. They play Germany in the semi-final of that tournament, and may even be changed if he does win the tournament. There has been, I'm told, contact with Mourinho, Mourinho's representatives, and he is interested in the job. Friends say that it's always been a dream of his to coach Portugal, and not that long ago he gave an interview when he was asked about turning down the Portuguese job when he was at Roma, and he said, "I think I was emotional when I didn't accept and decided to stay at Roma. I think I made a mistake. Portugal wanted me twice, and I think they'll want me a third time one day, and then I will accept it." So maybe we'll see the answer to your analysis in a year's time, and heading into the next World Cup.
We could have a World Cup where you have Thomas Tuchel in charge of England and Carlo Ancelotti in charge of Brazil and Jose Mourinho in charge of Portugal. I mean, how appetizing would that be? It's maybe it's reflective of the fact that, you know, I was talking about plotting careers, and it's difficult for the elite managers to go from elite job to elite job. So maybe we're going to move towards a place where international football, as Tuchel's almost kind of doing it as a gap year, you know, but that kind of idea of I'll do a year with the national team, it seems to be coming into fashion. For Jose, I think it would be such a logical choice in terms of going full circle, in terms of the age he's at now. He's what, 62, I think, and in terms of opportunity, because Portugal have got a terrific chance at the World Cup. It's the last World Cup. Well, okay, I say that. I mean, might still be there in 5 years' time of Ronaldo, but probably the last World Cup of Ronaldo, who needs to be cleverly managed. And I think Jose's got a year left at his in his deal at Fenerbahce, but it's not easy being manager there, you know, for the reasons I've outlined, and also it's a pretty hectic place to live, Istanbul. A fantastic city, incredible city, but you know, not an easy place just to get around, for example. And I could see there being human attractions to the different rhythm of an international job, and the fact that he could be back in London, which is his family base, and spend a lot of time in Portugal, which of course is his home country. So I'd say watch this space. I think if they offer it to him, it'll be hard to refuse.
So we've been talking about Europa League final winner and Jose Mourinho. We have a Europa League final to look forward to between two, I think it's fair to describe them as pretty incompetent Premier League sides. Johnny, after Manchester United and Tottenham made it through last night, we have 15th place Manchester United with 39 points against 16th place Tottenham Hotspur with 38 points. Both clubs happily on course for their worst ever Premier League seasons. Ruben Amorim has won 3 of his last 10 matches. Each of them wins in the Europa League. I think you can say the one against Lyon was particularly fortunate. This calendar year, United have won a sum total of 3 Premier League matches. against Southampton in January, Ipswich Town in February, and Leicester City in March. Those three might have something in common. And Tottenham are the relative excellence here, having won 4 of their last 11 matches, including the 2 semi-final wins over Bodo Glimt. This year, Tottenham have won 4 Premier League matches against Brentford, Ipswich, Southampton, and mighty Europa League finalist Manchester United. Is Arsene Wenger right in his recent argument that neither of them should be allowed to play in next season's Champions League, regardless of who wins in Bilbao a couple of weeks?
It seems to be a trait of current and ex-Arsenal managers to kind of just unilaterally redraw what constitutes success in Europe, doesn't it? No, he's not right. I mean, come on. This has been a long-established path now for and it is a big achievement winning the Europa League. I don't care what people say. Are you arguing that finishing 5th in a domestic league is better than winning Europa League? I mean, I'm old school. For me, football's about glory and trophies, and I think they've both teams, particularly United, have played some pretty good sides to get to where they are. I mean, you outline the disparity in performance between Europe and the Premier League for these two teams, and it's baffling. I mean, Europe must be looking at the league table in England and thinking, wow, Wolves and Everton must be incredible sides because they're ahead of Man United and Tottenham. How good must they be? Man United and Tottenham have lost 35 games this season in the Premier League between them. And 35 games, it's almost a full season of defeats combined. It's astonishing, but look, in fairness, I think it's clear that from Spurs' perspective, Postecoglou has targeted this tournament, and I watched his team talk in the dressing room last night after winning. It's online. Spurs released it, and he basically says, "Right, lads, the next 2 weeks are all about preparing for the final." Which I'm thinking the Premier League opponents might be interested in hearing that. But he's been quite honest about that, and I don't think Amorim is in quite the same category. I think he's been trying his best in the Premier League, but for United, it's more the weight and the history of that club are such that playing to improve your Premier League position from 15th to 12th or whatever, that doesn't float anyone's boat at Old Trafford, and there is that's been an extra edge and quality to their work in Europe. And over the tie, they were pretty good against the team I expected actually to win it. I thought Athletic Club would be the best team left in it, but United dismantled them 7-1. So yeah, I mean, not much to choose between these two teams in narrative and season. And I think it'll be the case in the final as well. Very difficult to call a winner there.
Look, it's a fascinating game because you've got Postecoglou fighting for his job, the opportunity to end that long, barren run for Tottenham Hotspur. You mentioned in your Mourinho piece his comment about being sacked 2 days before a final by a club who didn't have anything in the trophy room. But so Postecoglou has that opportunity, and then for Amorim, there's this potential to make a fundamental difference to the element which is going to be super important to his success at Manchester United, in that if they get into the Champions League by winning the Europa League, you're looking at probably £100 million in extra revenue for the club, which allows them to buy perhaps 2 of the starter players, if they're clever, that he needs, which would be unusual for Manchester United, has to be said, which he needs to turn things around. Where do you think Amorim and Ratcliffe are?
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, you're so right about the importance of this to the Amorim project. There's the financial element, and then there's that element of, to borrow a Jurgen Klopp phrase, turning doubters into believers. That if you look at Klopp's history, for example, his first half season at Liverpool was really up and down, but he got to the Europa League final, and that was important in demonstrating the path ahead and demonstrating to the owners who backed him. And I think Sadio Mane was one of the first signings that arrived just after that to keep investing and the supporters to keep believing. It happened for Mikel Arteta, who managed to win the FA Cup 6 months into his reign. And, you know, he's under pressure now because he hasn't won in 5 years. But imagine if he hadn't won that FA Cup. I mean, he may not have survived. So I think at a club like United, who expect to win, he would buy himself a lot of time, as well as buying that £100 million by winning. If you'd asked me where's the project even 2 weeks ago, I'd have said it's going nowhere. Right? I've been looking for signs of progress, and I think Amorim's an excellent coach. So it's not that I'm looking for signs that he's any good, but I'm just looking for signs that the combination of him and Man United are going to work. And I was struggling to see them. But the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of players back from injury, and we talked about player availability earlier on. That's a strength of Amorim's. He's got a great history of that. So he's got players back. He's got signs that some of those players whose talent has been lying dormant are now being reactivated finally, in the likes of Mason Mount, clearly, even old Harry Maguire. Rasmus Højlund has even managed to, knock the ball in the net a couple of times. With Ahmad coming back, with patent hunger now in the team because of competition for places. You look at Kobbie Mainoo coming on in the game and really been hungry to do something in the 10 minutes. I think you're now starting to see something. Casemiro's rehabilitation. I think you are now, just lately, just in the very recent times, starting to see something starting to happen. A chemistry between the players, a greater intensity on the pitch because of this extra competition and fitness, and a younger team. I think we're now starting to see the energy that you'd associate with an Amorim team, the physicality, and look, if we're talking about making bright, clever decisions, I think United should back him now, whatever happens. First of all, there's no, it'd be illogical not to. But secondly, I think there's been enough promise now over the last couple of weeks to see something and say, right, we need to let this guy bring in those couple of key starters to see where the project goes. And, he himself has stopped looking like a beaten man. And you can see he's relieved that he can finally see the green shoots. It's his demeanour's changed. And I don't think losing the final to Tottenham should alter anyone's perceptions if that is indeed what happens.
Well, they know that he doesn't have the right tools for the job in terms of the squad in front of him, and they've known that from the start, and that's one of the problems, one of the holes they've dug themselves into. So yes, if they're going to stay with them, then they need to allow him to make those changes. And you talk about the platform of the Europa League, and there's an interesting parallel in that the last time Manchester United won the Europa League was under Mourinho. He did kind of dump the end of the season to concentrate on that final and winning it, because he felt that psychologically it was very, very important. I think the phrase he used in an interview at the start of the next season, he said he wanted to change the pictures on the wall at the training ground and put some pictures of the current players winning trophies. So he felt psychologically it was important there. And then off the back of that campaign, they did have the best season post Ferguson in the Premier League. So the circumstances are very different in a number of ways, but there is history for that psychological boost and that entry into the Champions League through the Europa League to give you a bit of resource and a place in which to go and attack the Premier League. And if Amorim manages to get second to whoever wins the Premier League title next season, I don't think there'll be a single person at Manchester United complaining, in contrast to when Mourinho was in that position, and then he'll have the ability to take it from there. So we've done a report card for Manchester United. Let's do a 2 or 3 quick ones for some of the other leading clubs in the Premier League. Arsenal, you've referred to him talking after the exit about his idea that he didn't think there was a better team in the competition in the Champions League to his team. You also mentioned that in his 5 full seasons at the club, he hasn't won a single trophy. It was only in that first half season that he got the FA Cup. I noticed you referring to a statistic the other day about he's had 8 semi-final defeats in a row now, and the only goal that Arsenal scored in those defeats was in the second leg against PSG at 3-0 down. Where are they as a club, and what do they need to do to go beyond where they've been the last 2-3 seasons?
Well, time to deliver would be the message there. I think he gets one more season, but there are no excuses after this point. He's got to close the deal. Second, possibly second again, and then what's going to keep people believing this season is the progress in the Champions League, right? So, and they've got a new sporting director. Again, it makes no sense, I think, in the project terms to then suddenly change managers. But he himself has got to get the recruitment right. It's not just the recruitment department. Arteta's in this situation without a striker because that's the way he's kind of wanted it. He's prioritised other positions. So I think he gets this summer. I think they bring in a striker, and maybe someone on the left, and then it's time to deliver. And there can be no wriggle room after this for Arsenal. To be positive on their behalf, the Premier League will be quite open next season as it was this season. I think Liverpool are in transition, funnily enough, despite winning the title. They have got work to do, and Man City are still in massive transition. So there is an opportunity there, and it is all or nothing next season for Arteta.
I think the recruitment at Arsenal is interesting. One thing that I've been told is that, as you kind of alluded to there, Arteta made a decision on the squad for this season, and one of the decisions was to keep a relatively short squad. Yeah. He wanted a tight group of players. He wanted to use a core group of players most of the time, and he thought that was the better way of attacking league title in the Champions League, and that's been proven to be wrong. I mean, he talks about they've been unfortunate with injuries, but I think if you run a tight squad, don't be surprised if you end up with more injuries. You also mentioned Andrea Berta's arrival there. What I'm hearing is he wants ready-made players in. Will be active in the market. But I think it's very relevant when a new sports director comes in and it wasn't the director of your choice, that you'll only get a certain amount of time as coach. If he doesn't start winning, if he doesn't start achieving the targets, Berta will want to change the coach after a certain period.
And look, it's little details have got to be better. So in terms of recruitment, Arsenal used up their 2 allowed Premier League loans on Raheem Sterling and Neto. Now, could they not have done with keeping one of them up their sleeve to be able to loan in a striker in January? And those signings, I think, were Arteta led. So with a new sporting director, there will be greater scrutiny on these decisions, I think. And you're quite right to point out that whenever there's a change of ownership or sporting directorship at a club, the clock is ticking, because hierarchies change usually because there's a need to improve what's there before. So the coach usually gets a bit of time, but certainly limited time. And I think you're right to say that this, for that reason as well, he'll have to succeed.
So Liverpool, absolute runaway champions, and now officially the greatest football club in England, having doubled their Premier League title count. You mentioned them being in transition. That would suggest you don't think Arne Slot's side are set for a period of dominance that their epithet suggests.
Well, he's been so good that I wouldn't put it past him to move towards creating that prolonged period, because if you look at what he's done this first year, but it's certainly not at a point where anything's guaranteed, because as we know now, Trent Alexander-Arnold's definitely leaving. Absolute key player for them, not just positionally, but in terms of the unique creative element he brings to the team. And what I've been told around Liverpool is that they will, when they're replacing, it's not so much that they'll be looking at defined positions to replace, but more functions. So what that means is they might not look for a new right back because they've got Conor Bradley, but what they will look for is another source of creativity in the team to replace Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think they're going to bring in Kirkez. I'd be surprised if that doesn't happen at left back. And they quite a bit might hinge on any sort of deals they can do at the top of the pitch to flip Darwin Núñez, maybe change another one and get another force in up there. So, if they get those right, then I think the rest of the league's in trouble. But there's no guarantees at all because of how difficult recruitment is. But I think it's a key juncture for them, despite having just won the league. I think what they did last year, which was keeping the squad together more or less, I don't think that's an option now. I think they are going to need and will act in the market, and a lot will depend on who they can bring in.
I guess the one element they have in their favour is that there is a relative weakness in the Premier League at present, which I think we've seen in these Champions League results. So maybe you don't need to be as strong. Maybe they don't need to add quite as much as they would have had to over the last 4 or 5 seasons, where Manchester City were always guaranteed to put a large number of points up.
Yeah, it's one or two, but it's the right ones. It's plain that they've over-relied on Salah for both goals and assists this year. So somebody else, and Luis Diaz does his bit, but somebody else has to be contributing there. And then, as I say, there's a sort of change to the chemistry further back in the pitch. So I'm not talking about a 4 or 5 incomings. We're talking about 2 or 3, but they would need to be the right ones. And then there's the situation of Salah and Van Dijk have signed on for another 2 years, but the work in replacing them now starts now. Liverpool have bought themselves time. They made the right decisions in retaining those two, but they just bought time in terms of that problem. So there is quite a lot to do there.
And Manchester City, what's your analysis of where they go from here? Because there's so many open questions for them about what kind of game model do you go for? Which of the older players do you sacrifice? How much do you take from your academy, which has actually provided a lot of their competitors with quality over the last few seasons? And even I think the question of how much do you give Pep Guardiola to rebuild if you're not sure how long Pep Guardiola's going to be there to lead that rebuild on the training ground and from the dugout? Yeah,
it's fascinating. And how much impact does Hugo Viana want to have as a new sporting director? Because you don't take a job like that when you've been successful just to mind the shop. You take a job like that because you want to do something. So be interesting to see how that works. I think you're right about the game model because it's been changing this year. City have moved to a much more transitional game, and Guardiola's spent a lot of time talking about how football's changing and it's becoming ever more to do with speed and physicality, and he's rethinking. And then there's the issue of how long he's going to stay, how long he wants to stay. My sense is he'll want to put, a bit like Klopp did with Liverpool, put City back right in contention, win another prize and put them right in contention again, if not win, and then probably leave. So it's how long that's going to be. I'd say that they need a lot of surgery at the back. They've conceded more goals than Bournemouth, for example, this year. As many goals as Everton, who are 14th, and they've lost that base. Of course, Rodri will be back, and you need to see how the team's going to look with him there. There are issues, as you say, with how much do you want to promote and trust talents like Nico O'Reilly in that team. But I just think I go back to the signings they made in January. Apart from Marmoush, if you look at the two centre-backs, kids, signings for the next 3-4 years, not signings for next season. So I think that signals where they are. They are at the start of a new cycle, and it's fascinating, as you say, how much of that cycle Pep Guardiola is going to be there for.
Well, regular listeners to the podcast will remember that we talked about talent scouts judging those two centre-backs that Manchester City signed as they would be good if you could combine the two into one player, but neither one has the right set of characteristics in their view to be starters for Manchester City down the line. And if those people are right, then that suggests that both of those transfers be unsuccessful. They also have the big question of what the Premier League does, what the independent tribunal decides.
Yeah.
It now looks like that will have no effect on the summer window, and will be whatever the decision, we'll be looking at a legal challenge to it and talking about it through next season. Let's finish with Chelsea, also in a European final, Europa Conference League finalists, with a date lined up against Manuel Pellegrini's Real Betis. According to their financial accounts, they're now the most profitable club in the Premier League, which is a stunning achievement. Well, I think a few trophies should be heading the way of their accountants for that one. What do you think of Chelsea, Johnny? Does this reaching a European final, does that say they've got the job right, they're on the edge of getting into the Champions League? Enzo Maresca, is he the correct solution? Are they on the path to progress that they should be, given how much has been invested in that team?
Well, a bit like United, it's been a really good couple of weeks for the Chelsea and the project and the manager there. A couple of weeks which maybe change perceptions a bit. I think they've tinkered too much as an ownership since taking over, and I think a period of trying to embed a manager and a squad is necessary. They've still got one of the youngest squads in the Premier League. So I say Enzo gets a pass. I say he gets another season. I say that they've been shown the roadmap in recent weeks and months with younger players. I mean, you had Reggie Walsh at 16 making his debut in Europe last night. You got Tyreek George, who looks really, really good, and that has to be the continued blueprint for Chelsea. But I don't think they're ready to win next year. Not the league title, and wouldn't be the Champions League. I think there has to be an acceptance that with a squad that young, with this sort of start again policy, that it's a 2 or 3 year thing, and that we're only 1 year into it. And Enzo himself, he's actually one of the least experienced coaches in the Premier League. If you look at, he might be in his early 50s, but if you look at games managed, I think he's more or less the least experienced. So he's got some things right, and he's managed different parts of the season not so well this year. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement there that he has to be given time to learn on the job.
And the one thing I'm really interested in seeing at Chelsea next season is the arrival of Estevan from Brazil, who multiple people are telling me is one of the very best young players in world football. So it's going to be fascinating to see him in the English league and see how they manage to integrate him and whether they can give him a good pathway and use that talent appropriately.
Yeah. He's one, like you, Duncan. I've heard unilaterally people from who know the Brazilian market well going, wow, they've got a good one there. They've got a really good one there. And I think Kennedy Paez is also due to arrive. So yeah, it makes no sense it would make no sense to suddenly change manager, to suddenly bring in a whole heap more experienced players, because you've got this project around young players, and you've got a talent like Estevao arriving, and we know Chelsea's history of historically of not giving youngsters, even youngsters they've signed for a lot of money, enough of an opportunity. So I think they have to do so this time.
Transfers Podcast is running an audience survey at the moment. The more replies we get, the better. So please, if you have a few minutes to fill out the forms and tell us what you think, we'd love to hear from you. The link is in the show notes and also on our social media platforms. Let's finish up with hero and villain. I'm going to choose the hero this week, and it's Inter centre-back Francesco Acerbi for the finish that kept his team in the Champions League when they looked very much beaten against Barcelona on Tuesday night. Beautifully converted goal with his wrong foot in the 3rd minute of added time, and at 37 years of age, the first European goal of his career. It's quite a combination of things. Indeed.
What a story. What started off with I think a 5th-tier Italian club, Pavia, as well. Just one of those great sort of slow burn careers. And what on earth was he doing up in the box? Maybe he's just too old to get back, but Inter are fascinated, aren't they? They don't play in a very conventional way, and they certainly don't play in the cliched Italian way, because I don't think Helenio Herrera would have his centre-back attacking a cross into the box in the 94th minute.
Or his full-backs attacking in the way that Denzel Dumfries does. What's your sense for that final? Because what I'm hearing from the PSG camp is they might have preferred to have had Barcelona in the final to this, super experienced, wily Inter team.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one for them. Inter are the specialists at doing things that make you uncomfortable. As I said, a very unconventional team. Almost like a sort of incredible version of Brentford. Brentford are, you speak to coaches in the Premier League and they'll tell you, blimey, Brentford do a few things that most teams don't do, that make them hard to play against. But Inter troubled Manchester City at their peak 2 years ago in Istanbul, and they made it so difficult for Barcelona. They didn't play the way you might have expected them to, but the way the centre backs just overlap and maraud forward. The way they're willing to gamble, the way they're willing to sometimes miss out the midfield. I think there is a lot of reasons for PSG to be wary in that tie, although I would still make them favourite just because of the sheer talent and sheer coaching job that Enrique's done so far.
So villain of the week to wrap up.
Well, I was trying to Google his name, but I think the VAR that gave the penalty against Luís Skelly, it was Luís Skelly, wasn't it? In the Arsenal game. I mean, you had a brilliant game of football, a brilliant tie, and then I don't know, so somebody has to. I thought the refereeing team were all they wanted to be the stars of the show, and I thought that was a really poor VAR decision. And Vitinha had the good grace to be so embarrassed by the penalty being awarded that he decided not to take it properly. So fair play to him.
Yes, it's amazing how often VAR appears in this villain of the week stuff. You'd think someone at the top of football would have a proper proper look at it. I think it's really, really helping us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Arsene Wenger's got that FIFA role, and instead of telling teams what they're not allowed to win, maybe he could have or strange things about offside. Maybe he could look at that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he's far too involved in completely changing the offside rule in a way that will absolutely change every element of the way teams attack without experimenting in it first. It's great stuff, Arsene. Can see why Infantino likes you.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, you just mentioned the villain of every week there, but that's another story.
Johnny, thanks for joining us on the Transfers podcast, and enjoy the end of the season.
Thanks, Duncan. Pleasure.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. Please help us out by filling out our audience survey. The link is in the show notes and on our social media platforms. And FootballTransfers.com now has an app if you'd like to download that and get the latest news from the website. If you like what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Twitter and Blue Sky addresses at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Jonathan is on Twitter and Blue Sky at J Northcroft. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. He and McCarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Everyone's gonna go, where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go, where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go, where everyone's gonna go.